Good morning. My name is Shaii and I'm with the Social Justice Institute. Today I'm going to be interviewing Michele Hill as part of the Voicing in Action project. Today is Sunday, February 16, 2014, and I do want to state for the record that I have two signed informed consents from Michele giving us permission to conduct this interview. So good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Wonderful.
Wonderful. So as you know, we're going to be interviewing you about your time in East Cleveland. But before we do that, I'd like to start out by asking you to tell me a little bit about yourself and the history of your family.
Okay. Well, I was born in 1952, Mount Sinai Hospital, which is no longer there. It was a Jewish hospital. And at the time of my birth, my parents lived on Ashbury in the Glenville area. And it was also very close to where my parents joined Fellowship Lutheran Church. So then we moved from there to Olivet, which was still in the Glenville area, not too far away. And my father, very fortunate, his name was Cleve Walter Patton. He died in 2007. Wonderful, wonderful father. And he attended high school. He graduated from East Tech, and he actually started working at Alcoa Aluminum Company right out of high school. He owned a house when he was 19. That's when he bought his first house. And he and my mom married in 1949. My mother's name is Virgie Ezel Patton. And so he went to service. He was in service during the Korean War. It was the very end of the Korean War, so he wasn't there like for an extended period of time. But it wasn't any longer than 2 years. And so when he came back from the service, he got his job back at Alcoa, and that's where he retired. So he's only worked at one place. He was an engineer, and he retired after 49 years of working at Alcoa. And I found out that he really was a pioneer. He took the young men, the young black men who came to Alcoa, he took them under his arms and worked with them, really taught them the ins and the outs. He was one of the very first black individuals to receive his license, his electrical license, and was able to join the union at a time when they weren't letting blacks in the union. So he was very fortunate. And he also went to John Carroll University. And I remember my dad was just really a very bright man. He had 3 sisters, all of whom were very intelligent. And it's very interesting because now his family, his father and mother hailed from South Carolina. And I was doing some family research and found out fairly recently. I always thought that the German part of the family, my father's mother's side of the family, were German Jew, but in doing my research and talking to various members of the family, I was able to ascertain they were actually French Jews and came over. They were the French Huguenots, and they came over to escape persecution at that time, religious persecution. And my father's side also, that's where there's Blackfoot on both my mother and my father's side. And I remember seeing my great-great-grandmother. She came to visit because she pretty much stayed in South Carolina, Abbeville. along with her daughters. She had some daughters who stayed. All of them didn't leave, so they stayed. And I just remember she visited us, and I used to say, who is this? She was such a beautiful woman, even when she was older. And she she always wore her hair in a braid, just a very long braid down to her waist, but just a very, very genteel woman. And my father's family also came from South Carolina as well. And so moving back to my dad worked second shift all the time that he was at Alcoa. So it was a real treat for us, especially in the summertime, to stay up late and, you know, wait till Daddy came home. But we were so tired a lot of times we could not, you know, wait up that late. But if we could, he usually brought treats. You know, he'd stop and get something to eat. So that was a very special time. And then on Saturdays. And my father was so much fun. I remember as far back as like when I was like 4 or 5, and he would just throw us up in the air. And he used to always call us blukies and flubbadubs, you know. And I guess that came from, at least the flubbadubs came from the Howdy Doody show. And one of the things that I remember about my dad is he had such a sense of humor, and he was also a prankster. So I guess that's where I got my pranksterness, because I'm always doing pranks, especially when we were growing up. But my father had very long vacations in the summertime. And he would take us and the neighbor kids, whoever could fit in the car, he would take us to Euclid Beach. He would take us to, at that time, McDonald's was there. So, okay, let's go. We're going to go to McDonald's. Wouldn't touch McDonald's now with a 10-foot pole, but back then, you know, that was a lot of fun. Circus, ice capades, the Shriners Circus, which is a little bit different from Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey. But he used to we'd get in the car and he would drive really far east or far west, and it wasn't until, you know, we got older, we realized we really knew not just Cleveland, but the suburban areas, because we used to drive all the time, all these places. And some of the times we would visit some of the families where my dad worked. Some of them would be white families. I remember when we got a bike, one of his friends or acquaintances at Alcoa's children outgrew this bike. So we went way out, like it was like around Bay Village area, and, you know, played with the kids and got the bike. There were 6 of us. I'm the second eldest, and second daughter. There were 5 girls and 1 boy. He was the second youngest. He was a junior. And it was always live at the Patton House, never Memorex. And we had, you know, it was a mixed bag. You know, we had a lot of fun. My family is highly creative, and I was always entertaining them, probably more so than the other 5. And just had, you know, wonderful times growing up in the Glenville area. That was our playground, and it was a wonderful playground. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that my father just, you know, he just was a fun-loving person. So parks, we practically lived in parks during the summertime. He'd pack a lunch and off we'd go. And his favorite was making macaroni and tuna salad, and, you know, and he was just so much fun. So because of relatives living in the around Ashbury, even when we moved off, and the church being there, so we would leave church on Sunday and we would go to the lagoon, you know, behind or in front of the art museum. And at that time, you would see families just, you know, on blankets and just enjoying. There'd be an ice cream man, a man coming around with one of those ice cream trucks that, you know, you pedal. And it was a very family-oriented time. And if we weren't going there, we would go to the lake because we could walk to the lake, and we would, most of the time we drove, and we, again, get a blanket and we'd watch if it was a fireworks or just sit there. And we also knew the museums. We really, really knew the museums. My mother is a professional artist and has been a professional artist all my life. Very unusual for a black female. And she was, even at the age she is now, she still does her work. She's 85, soon to be 86. And she's stayed steadfast in her art career. And she attended Cleveland Institute of Art when she graduated from John Hay. My mother grew up in the around 80, well, she lived on 93rd and Cedar, and my father's lived in the central area, Woodland, around that area. And my mother's side of the family, my mother was very creative, so her father had artistic ability. He was a tailor. He also, like a lot of black men at the time, worked odd jobs. But his father was had a mortuary business in South Carolina, and none of the children wanted to have anything to do with that business. Matter of fact, they all ended up moving to the south, to the north, from Spartanburg, North Carolina. My mother's side. My mother's side, exactly. But they were highly creative, and that's where I think I get the creative gene, or we all do, you know. But it also meant that we were closely tied to art too. So we knew the art museum like we knew the backs of our hands. And we were enrolled in the art classes at the museum when we were younger. And we were the only black kids there at the time. This was in the 50s. And so I was very conscious of my blackness, or the fact that I was different from the other kids who were in the art classes. But in addition to the art museums, you know, my dad, because he loved the museums, he'd take us to the history museums, the Western Reserve Historical Society. That was all part of our background. And there was the swings that are the Wade Oval area. They had the Monkey House, which was part of the zoo. And that was when they had swings that were in the back, and we would go over there at least once a week. And so that was really a fun time.
So tell me a little bit more about your siblings.
Well, my oldest sister is shy. She's always been shy. And so a lot of times my mother would have me and my sister go if we were conducting, you know, business, you know, running errands and so forth. And my sister got to, she was in like the Jack and Jill, and it was another group, because they were always trying to bring her out, you know. And she got the parties. I never had a party outside of, you know, getting a cake and everybody in your family singing happy birthday. But I remember she was the one that had the parties. I didn't have a birthday party until I was 23 years old, and I remember that because my eldest daughter was born the month before, and it was a surprise birthday party. So when it's your first birthday party, you remember that, right? So that was memorable. But we had a lot of fun, especially like in the summer times. And my mother was a seamstress, not by trade, but you know, she sewed for herself and for us. So we grew up knowing how to sew very well. And I remember the first thing I made was a gown, and I remember sewing as young as 10 years old. And I, you know, throughout the years, I made some pretty nice things. And matter of fact, it continued even through high school, and I would make things sometimes for my friends, you know. Not a lot, but, you know, here and there. And made my prom dresses and so forth. And I remember making my children's embroidery dress, christening dress, which was embroidered. And probably the biggest, or I should say most complex thing I made was a trench coat. It had like over 108 pieces, or around 108 pieces, with the epaulets and, you know, all of the, yeah, it was nice. My sewing skills were very, very good.
Now, did your other siblings, your other sisters sew as well?
They did. They did. And one of the things that we've always done was made Halloween costumes. And back in the day, as a matter of fact, I was attending Parkwood Elementary School. And I could remember every time Halloween came around, my sisters and I, whether it be my oldest sister or my youngest sister, because the costumes they were passed down. And I remember very distinctly every single Halloween, if it was raining outside, which a lot of Halloweens, you know, it was rainy, you know. So the classes were, you know, they didn't go outside. And so we would be paraded around the entire school, all, you know, the classes. And, or if it was a nice day, all of us were outside and we just formed a circle. We always had to walk around the circle. And I remember the Raggedy Ann and Raggedy Andy costumes that my mother made. And we looked as though we stepped out of the pages of a Raggedy Ann and Raggedy Andy adventure. I mean, everything from the makeup, you know, the clothing we had like the mitten hands. And my mother I remember she took a mop, she dyed it kind of like a rust orange color for the hair, stitched it, and it looked, I'm telling you, it was so amazing. And even when we went around trick-or-treating, people would have us come in, or they would call people who were in the house, come, you gotta see this, you know, you gotta see these kids. And so that was very memorable. There were some other things about my elementary experience that I remember. I remember they had a banking program in the school. Society Bank used to come in, and you brought your little pennies and your bank book to school, and someone would record it, a member of the bank would record it. And from my recollection, it appeared as though that was like once a week or once every 2 weeks, something like that. I can remember we were given these real long bags for rags. So we were supposed to fill the bags and bring them back to school, and we were told that that's what they made paper from, you know, the rags. And there was always United Appeal, you know. Remember the United Appeal, because you're always competing with the classroom, some classroom to get the most, you know. And I remember my first grade teacher stands out very distinct in my mind. Her name was Miss Toffler. She had all white hair. She was an older woman, and I remember wondering why she was still teaching. She was a big woman and never, ever smiled. At least I never saw her smile. I was petrified. I was scared of that woman. And for lunch, we would, my mother, or even going to school, even before lunch, my mother would wonder why, of all the kids, I just wanted to hurry up and get out the door, never wanted to be late. And it was because I didn't want to face her wrath. And she would have us at the beginning of the day, all of us would stand in the back of the classroom, and whatever was the agenda of the day, whether it was spelling your name or doing the sounds of the alphabet, whatever the agenda was, I just froze, I don't remember what my responses were, except that I know sometimes when you're so afraid, you second guess yourself, and I just remember it was not a really good time. And it was not until years later I had a discussion with my mother. Somehow, Ms. Toffler came up. And that's when I found that some of the children who were in her class actually needed psychiatric attention afterwards.
After taking the class with
Absolutely. So I guess I was one of the fortunate ones.
Wow.
And
which school was this?
that was Parkwood. That was Parkwood Elementary.
What grade were you in?
I was in Parkwood from kindergarten. I remember I had Miss Carden in kindergarten, and then Miss Toffler. I don't remember a lot of the other names there. And then they built Joseph F. Landis, and so I went to Joseph F. Landis from just the 5th and the 6th grade, and then from there I went to Harry E. Davis for a year. And I can remember when we went to Joseph F. Landis, school was, for me, very difficult because I thought I was really stupid after coming from Miss Toffler's class, I hated to read. It was just, school was just, I just couldn't wait for summer vacation, And so things started getting better, and I started analyzing, because that's the one gift that I have internally, is my ability to analyze situations. And it's like I had a little analyst inside, Oh, you're not dumb. Matter of fact, you're really intelligent. You know how to sew. You could follow a guide, the instructions. You put things together. You can understand comics, because that was a big thing in my house, especially my older sister and myself. Comic books, oh yeah, Archie, and then there were not so much the guy type superheroes, but Little Lil and Archie, Jughead, Veronica and Betty. That stands out in my mind. And we would, pass them around, because right next door to us there was a family the woman had 13 children. And there was a child for each one of us, except for my youngest sister, Lori. So wherever we went, we never had to worry about, kids to play with. And then there was my cousin, Karen. We called her KK then. So we all grew up together. And as girls, we stayed pretty close to the home, And I can remember summertime, we would walk down to Corey Methodist Church. That was the first Jewish community center. I don't know if you knew that or not. but that was the first one because the Glenville area was inhabited primarily of German Jews or Russian Jews at that time. And you could still see the remnants by just looking at the churches, which were previously their, what do you call it, tabernacles, or synagogues, that's the word I'm trying to look for. And but by the time we were living there were sprinkles of white people who were still living there. And we knew this, you know, we'd see them, and some of them were still in the school. And when I went to Joseph F. Landis, there weren't that many at that time. And then at Harry Davis, I can only recall maybe one or two. So there was, they got out of there. And I understand that a lot of the Jews at the time, because we're talking about the migration from the Glenville area around the 40s, 50s, well, in my lifetime, the 50s. And at that time, even Shaker Heights was not open to Jews. So that's why they either built in houses in Beechwood, some of them moved in areas of Cleveland Heights, and it was the Jews and the blacks that worked together to open up housing in Cleveland Heights, Shaker. And I remember the first area for the Jews as well as the blacks would have been it was the Ludlow area.
Okay.
Yeah. And
so, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but before we continue, you started out talking about your siblings. So you told us about your oldest sister.
Yes.
Can you give us her name, please?
Her name is Stephanie Mary. And so she was, she was quiet, but she had a lot of, of friends. And as I said, my mother, she was in the clubs. And the rest of us were in a club. I know my sister under me, Jennifer, she's 2 years younger than I. And my sister under her, Julie, who is another 2 years younger than Jennifer. And I remember we had a summertime club and meeting at various people's houses. The mothers would serve refreshments, and we had, little meetings about what we were going to do. And I remember there being someone collecting money for whatever it was, and I couldn't tell you what it was if we did. But maybe going to the movies, because there was the Liberty movie theater was relatively close by. And I do remember we frequented the Liberty Theater a lot. So my brother came next. He was 2 years younger than Julie. And then a year and a half after that was my youngest sister, Lori, who is no longer with us. She made her transition from the earthly plane in 91. So I was the lively one in the family, that I could tell you. And I remember just my parents, my mother especially, said that I was the one that was the most rambunctious. And it stands to reason, because I always loved tumbling or active. I was active, and that was something that stayed with me all my life. I remember teaching myself how to do cartwheels and round-offs and splits, and I could, we played badminton or volleyball, and just had so much fun. And even when I graduated from high school, when I said it stayed with me, because I was voted the most athletic among the girls in my high school when I graduated. I loved trampoline and balance beam and the horse and the rings. And even at age 61, I could still do a round off into a straight split. And
Impressive.
yeah, but you know, I guess if you're athletic, there's certain things that just stay with you, you know. And but we always, you know, like playing outside. And I remember we had an uncle, Uncle George. Oh, he was like older individuals would know Yule Gibbons if I say he was a Yule Gibbons type. So he was always talking to us about herbs, and he was eating very healthy. He took care of the animals at Case Western Reserve University's lab, and we used to love to go to the lab with him to look at the animals, help feed the animals. And we would walk. He lived on Parkgate across the street from what was then Miles Standish School. Now it's Michael R. White School. And we would walk from Parkgate all the way over to Case Western Reserve and back along the cultural gardens. So that was one of our favorite things we'd love to do, spend the night with Aunt Lillian and Uncle George. And Lillian was my great aunt on my mother's father's side. And so, you know, I learned how, you know, some cooking. Of course, my mother cooked too. She was a gourmet cook. My mother's mother really could cook very well, and she and my great uncle Jack opened up a restaurant on Euclid. It was like around 107th and Euclid somewhere. It was pretty popular.
What year this was?
Oh, that was before me. I think that was somewhere in the 40s, early 50s, somewhere in there.
Okay.
But that I can remember. But and during the summertime, you know, in addition to walking to the lake and the cultural gardens, which we knew, we could identify which cultural gardens we were, you know, was going to be next. You know, we knew them. When we got to a certain one, we would race. That would be the place where we just cut loose. And usually it was no more than two of us that spent a night at one time. And we had fun playing pinochle, and it was just really a lot of fun. And there was a nursing home that was also across the street. It was on Parkgate, or I guess it was actually on East Boulevard, right at Parkgate. And my my Aunt Ollie worked there in the nursing home. So that was a lot of fun. It was something else I was going to say. When we were younger, we used to go to summer camp. Most of the time it was Centerville Mills Camp. And I guess because I was the one that was the most rambunctious of the group, if nobody went to camp, if it was just one person, it would be me. It's like, okay, let's give ourselves a break. Let's send Michele to camp. But we had fun, and all the kids there were just, you know, a lot of them would be crying and homesick, and I loved it. Homesick, you just got here, you know, it's only 2 weeks, you know. And then, but my favorite camping experience was part of the Rolling Y. It was in Carrollton, Ohio, and we were there for a 2-week period of time, and it was a dude ranch. So we were assigned our own horses all while we were there. And I still remember my horse's name was Sugarfoot. And I was the first one, you know, I got the first choice, and because where I was standing, he said, okay, what horse do you want? I said, I want the fastest horse in the girls' barn, because there was the girls and then the guys always also. And so I did not know that that also meant that the horse was the most spirited horse. I found that out. We had a rodeo. And when I say we had a rodeo, I mean we'd have roping contests where we had to, you know, what do you call it, wrestle the cattle wrestling, but they were the smaller, you know, the calves. So we had to hurry up and rope them and whatnot. And we also had a horse contest. So my horse, being as the fastest horse and the most spirited one. As I approached the corral, Sugarfoot just took off with me on him and jumped 2 fences. The owner of the outfit, I guess he was very worried, of course, and so he got on his horse and he caught up to me, and he could see I was pulling the reins back, and that didn't do any good. So he said, just seesaw the bit in the mouth, take the reins, you do like this, which is very painful, and that's how it came to a stop. So I went back and won the clover leaf, where you had to go around and around and then back, the first one back, and some other races. And I thought I was, what was Annie Oakley or whatever. I loved it. I loved it because I was a tomboy and I loved all that stuff. And so even like in high school, archery, I loved archery. I was on the basketball team, girls basketball team, intramurals. I did very well with that. I even liked football, track and field. Gymnastics was my favorite, though. I loved it.
Wow, you've painted this wonderful picture of your childhood, so I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you were most likely living still on Owlette when the Glenville riots.
Absolutely.
Can you share your experiences, your perceptions?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was living there during the time of the riots, and I remember when that happened, I was very, very frightened because of all the looting going on. And my father had to get the hose and wet down the roof to keep the house from catching fire. And we lived real close to 105th Street, so we could see, a lot of the action just from our porch. But it was very unsettling to see some of the people looting. And primarily, I'll just say, it was mostly one family, at least on our side of the street, that we knew. And it was not, it was like, yeah, if it was going to be looting, that would be the family that would do it. It was just, that's just the way it was. And afterwards, the day afterwards, when the streets were lined with the National Guard, and you also saw families, just cars filled with white kids, or I should say white families, in station wagons that were coming to view the carnage, I guess. And you would see an unusual number, just like a caravan, one after another, of white families and primarily station wagons. And it didn't make sense to me why individuals would want to destroy the houses, or I should say the shops, the businesses in their own neighborhood. That has never made any sense to me. And some of them were black-owned businesses. And of course, after that, some of them, just got the, earlier I was talking about how the neighborhood that I lived in was a Jewish neighborhood. Certainly that was one part of the city, of one part of Glenville. But I also remember there were a lot of Polish people on the other side, which would have been more the south, more of the west side, say around 98th and Superior to St. Clair area. So that was an area that I remember my cousins who were older, and they were males, the guys usually gravitate to more outside the neighborhood than females, certainly than I did, or my siblings. And they would always talk about how the Polish boys would always start something, and there was a line of demarcation that they knew better than to cross. And my uncle had, 4 sons. He had a daughter, actually had 5 sons, 4 sons and a daughter. But I remember his older children had a whistle. Each of them had, he had a specific whistle for them. And his whistle was very shrill. And if he called them by whistled for them, they had to be home by that, certain time. If they weren't, they were in really big trouble. So they knew they couldn't go, beyond that whistle. And it was like streets away. It was just unbelievable. But I remember one time my cousin was coming home, trying to beat it home in time so he wouldn't get in trouble. And police almost killed him, because thinking that he was running from a robbery that took place, and so that was really a close call. He didn't get shot, but they definitely, drew their guns.
Was this during the time of the riots?
It was around that same time, yeah. And I can remember my cousin Tony and my Uncle Eddie used to play baseball every summer. If they didn't do anything else, they were on a baseball team. And I know that as they sometimes played in areas that, where the kids gave them trouble, called them names and so forth. So it wasn't really open. We just experienced a number of prejudicial treatment and racism. We would walk to Euclid Beach from where we lived, and we always were in a group. But we just remember very distinctly of not being welcome in the Euclid area. And then, that was something that, had to do with, I understand, the closing of Euclid Beach. They had a lot of racial tension. How much of that had to do with the closing, I don't know. But I remember that was the word on the street, so to speak. But I remember the racial, when I was younger, I was very much aware of racism and inequality, and primarily because of course the neighborhood changed, complexion. But I remember when I started at Joseph F. Landis School, we were so excited because it's a brand new school. It was still within walking distance. Kids used to walk home for lunch. We watch Captain Penny and, Bullwinkle, what was it? Rocky and Bullwinkle, and Sherman and Peabody and the Little Rascals. And that was a really a fun time. And I remember walking to and from school. It didn't matter how cold it was. I'm sure they had some what they call snow days. But it seems like, no matter what the weather was, you were going to school. You didn't think, oh, it's too cold, I'm, not going to go to school. And I can remember all the games we played on the way home. If there was a W, which was with the water pipe, it just meant that was where the water pipes were. And, if you stepped on that slab, you were a water baby, so you went home trying to jump over those slabs. Or if you stepped on the cracks, you break your mother's back, little games like that. Those are just so much fun time. And when I was at Joseph F. Landis, I remember after school, there were activities for the kids. We would come, they'd get out the rope. There was always someone there at the school who would bring out the balls. And so kids always had some place to go, something to do. But and Joseph F. Landis was, I was president of the student council, as a matter of fact, and I remember my campaign manager, Geraldine Frounder, she said, oh, Michele, you should run for president of the student council. I said, oh, okay. And there was a little boy, Anthony Gray, who was shorter. He was a little short dude. But he said, if you win, I'm going to beat you up. And Geraldine was a real big girl. And she said, you are not going to do any such thing. If you put a hand or a finger on Michele, I'm going to take care of you. That was it. So anyway, I won. And I remember giving speeches. And that was the first time I gave a speech and handled it very well. I memorized it and felt very comfortable giving it to the PTA. You know, they had session in the morning and in the evening. But I also remember, you know, everybody remembers where they were when they heard the news that John F. Kennedy was killed. And I remember what I had on. It was a gym day. I had my gym. Back in that day, we wore gym uniforms, blue uniforms that snapped all the way down. And so I had a wraparound skirt. But things changed significantly during the time when the bus boycott took place in the 60s. And there was a woman who was in the neighborhood, Sarah Lovejoy. She was a friend of my family's for many, many years. And she used to take care of children. Matter of fact, my cousins were the very first kids that she took care of. She didn't have any children of her own, but anytime you saw Sarah Lovejoy, you saw Sarah with at least 2 kids. There were 2 to 4 kids. And she was always trying to impart knowledge to the kids, and she always had a little program. I remember at the Y that was located on St. Clair, whatever. It was called Children's Hour. But what I really appreciate about Sarah Lovejoy was during the time that they had the bus boycott, we attended what was called Freedom School. We weren't going to just stay home and not do anything, you know. And that was at St. Mark's Church, St. Mark's Presbyterian Church. And that was when I first learned about Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman and Langston Hughes. And it was a very exciting time for me to learn that history. And I can remember when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would come to the neighborhoods, listening to him, you know, his speeches, and that was very exciting. I was only 12 years old during the Freedom Summer of '64, when a lot of the Freedom Riders, the young whites and the blacks from the colleges and university would go to the South. So I remember wanting to go, but of course I was too young. I was only 12 years old at the time. And at that time, I attended Harry Davis Junior High just for a year. And at the time we were Harry Davis, I remember teachers talking to my parents, because I remember my parents, my mother more so, going to a PT, it wasn't a PTO meeting, it was an open house. And the teachers were sharing with her the fact that they felt that she should take us out and put us in, you know, private schools. So, you know, your children, you know, I don't know what it was that they saw, but they just felt that, you know, we, for whatever reason, should escape, you know, public education. So at that time, we made the transition to St. Paul Lutheran. But I remember right before going there, when I was, I remember we were told we were going to get new books when I was still in the Cleveland Public School. And we were so excited because we were going to get new books. Well, they were new to us, but they were old books that they got from the kids that lived on the west side of Cleveland. And so I knew that that was not right. And my father's sister was a teacher. Matter of fact, Evelyn Davis was a master teacher. And she could tell you a lot of stories about the things that happened in the public schools that were just clearly racist. And there were some teachers who were very fair-skinned, and consequently, not that they were trying to pass, some of them maybe, you know, but I know that some of those teachers taught on the west side. And so they would, you know, get information just by virtue of being very fair-skinned and their white counterparts thinking that they were like themselves, white. But I remember that very, very clearly, just being really excited, you know, only to be let down. Not just the one time, but it would happen over and over and over again. When I graduated, I remember at St. Paul Lutheran, I was valedictorian by class, but it was a real small class. Matter of fact, it was so small that the 7th graders sat on one side of the room, excuse me, of the room, and the 8th graders sat on the other side of the room. But most of the class were white. That was a German area. They were mostly Germans. My principal was German. He was also the teacher. And the principal was the teacher.
And just for the record, where exactly is St. Paul Lutheran, or was St. Paul Lutheran?
Located 55th and Superior. And the feeder schools, like the Lutheran schools, all went up to the 8th grade. And then from there, when we graduated from the 8th grade, we went to Lutheran East. And so I'm at Lutheran East, and my oldest sister was there. I got a scholarship, partial scholarship. And I remember being not militant, but I remember being very much aware, very conscious of my blackness and embracing it. And in such a way that I had white friends who went to Lutheran East and went over their houses, but I was very much aware of who I was. And I would have Operation Push come up to the school to, you know, I remember one time they came up and it was part of a class. And I remember this other class that I took, and the principal of Lutheran East was actually the social studies or geography social studies teacher. And I did a report about how race is a misnomer, you know. What are you going to judge by? The hair? Well, what about the Aborigines? The noses? What about the people who live in Ethiopia and that part of the country? The color of the skin? You know, and somehow, even though I didn't have all of the information, it was percolating. It was percolating, and I knew that there was something more than this race thing, and it had to do with power and control. And I remember refusing to say the entire Pledge of Allegiance, even when I was in the 8th grade. So I would say, you know, Pledge Allegiance, and then when it got to the last part with liberty and justice for all, I never said that, because I knew we didn't have liberty and justice. And I also remember when I was Lutheran East, and I had a lot of fun. I was cheerleading, you know, every year I was a cheerleader, and I enjoyed that. And I can tell you that my class was primarily white. Most of the kids in the school were white, but we knew, you know, a lot of us knew we were black. And even before Martin Luther King Jr. Day, you know, that was declared a holiday, we didn't go to school. it was like 2 years. 2 years before that, we just, the blacks just didn't go to school. And they knew what was up. And we come back the next day, especially the second time it happened. It's like, okay, where were you? Oh, we were sick, or well, I don't remember what it was, but they knew. They knew. And I can remember the consciousness was changing to the point where it was in the music. And so that was when we went to a party, and Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud was one of the songs we were singing. And it was over someone's house. And we had this big meeting after this happened, because some of the whites felt uncomfortable and felt that we were purposely flaunting our blackness, you know. And we say it was a song. Yes, we were doing that. You know, it was a two-edged coin, you know what I'm saying? Two-edged sword, rather. Part of it we were singing because we were black and proud. And the other was, it was a song. And we, you know, we sang it for that reason. But other than that, I mean, we had some real good times. There was not like any racial fighting or anything other than that. And I remember being very popular all while I was in school, and really liking that part, the social aspects of school more so than anything else. And so I can remember, you know, like a lot of the games. I forgot I was going to say something, but I can't remember what I was going to say. But there were just, it was very, very exciting. Oh, I know. I took a doctrine class. And during that class, we were supposed to visit churches, you know, just to have an experience outside of our own religion. Most of us were Lutheran at the time. And I chose to go to the Black Mosque. That was on Superior Avenue. And I remember being there and feeling very uncomfortable. The women sat, you know, in different place from the men, and I remember it was like, it was all about white hatred, you know. It was very, very disconcerting. And so I couldn't wait to get out there. I went with my friend Jean Madison. Her father was Robert Madison, of Madison Architect. And I used to spend the night over her house all the time. We had really good times. And so I just had a lot of favorable experiences. In terms of, you know, when I got, I left school. Okay, I graduated. That's where I want to go. Okay, I graduated from Lutheran East, 1970, and I went to Cleveland State University. And I stayed in the dorms. I was one of the first females who stayed in the dorm. The guys were in the dorm. It was located at Finn Tower, and they were there because of sports. Like if they had a sports scholarship, that's where they stayed. And there was just one floor where the females stayed. And we had our own bathrooms in our suites, you know, bunk beds. It was very nice. I really enjoyed it. Most of the time I was there, I was by myself until I had a roommate. She was from England. And, but I had a good time at Cleveland State. I was secretary of the black organization. It was called Shaii. It didn't last a real long time, but the blacks that were there, a lot of us moved in unity. And we really felt very proud of who we were. It was very difficult being at Cleveland State, which is known for having, you know, racist policies, and but a lot of it had to do with individuals who had come from predominantly black schools, and they may have gotten all A's. And I remember this one guy was feeling so bad, and he was very upset because he felt that he had been lied to. He said, I got A's, I got straight A's all the way through. And I get here and I find that I'm not really prepared. I don't have everything that I need to be prepared. I don't have all the knowledge. And he dropped out. But I felt that I was pretty comfortable having gone to Lutheranese, where I was told that a C would be equivalent to an A in a public school. So we had to do extensive reports. I knew how to do the footnoting, the opposite, ibit, opposite, and lopsit. And I'd already taken German. I actually took the advanced placement test in German, and so I didn't have to start all over. I think I tested out of the first 4 quarters of German. But I did take German with my sister. I was in a class with my sister when she also went to Lutheran. I mean, when she graduated from Lutheran, she went to Cleveland State. And my parents had paid for all 6 of us to go to Lutheran schools for a number of years. They were paying for our education. They valued our education to that extent. But when I was at Cleveland State, I got scholarships, I got financial aid. I worked in the Black Studies department during the time that I was there. Curtis Wilson was my professor. I love Curtis Wilson. He was just so giving, and at the time, he had an assistant who was Carol Hoover, who was Pat Hoover, Carol Hoover's sister. Their father was a minister of Olivet Institutional Church before Otis Moss was a minister. And she and Curtis helped me through. Sometimes they would give me money for books, $25 here or there. And they were my mentors. And I will always be grateful to them. And had a good time at Cleveland State. Mostly with my friends were Omega Psi Phi fraternity. The girls at that time were Pearls, because my oldest sister is a Pearl. And I helped sew the uniforms when they had the shows. So I am the only honorary Pearl of Cleveland State University. Later on, I became a QT. I was asked to pledge Delta, and I didn't because at the time, my honey, who became my husband, he was a bossless at that time, Omega Psi Phi fraternity. And there were a lot of girls that really had their eyes set on him. He was 2 years older than I. And I knew, that just was not the time to pledge. And I'm glad I didn't, in hindsight, with what I know now. I'm very glad that, I didn't at the time. And I wanted to focus on school. My major at that time was psychology. And I was learning a lot about psychology, which now I understood as being a part of mind control, you know what I'm saying? As education come around 360 degrees. And but I really enjoyed my time there. And I got married the last quarter, and that I was there. No, excuse me, I got married a year before because I was expecting the last quarter that I was there. But so I had finished school, and then I was working at Social Security Administration. I was co-oping, and that was a wonderful experience. but that was a time when I knew that I was going to stay home. I finished school, stayed home. I loved motherhood. Jumped in with both feet. I just loved it. And I was very comfortable and embraced it very easily. I never had any apprehension, never had to ask my mother or anybody anything. It was just so natural, and I just loved all aspects of motherhood, even the birthing, my pregnancy, my birthing. I had some incredibly wonderful experiences. And I was home with my children. I chose to be home with them. And I was very glad that my husband had a good job. He was at AT&T at the time. He was actually started out at Ohio Bell and was there during the divestiture. But that enabled me to be home. I was so into educating my girls. All three of them were girls, 3 years apart. And I didn't sit down and, in terms of teaching them to read, because they were young, as they were learning. But my oldest daughter was reading when she was age 2, and that was just simply by using a common sense approach to learning. And then I took her over. Someone said, well, she can go to Head Start. My kids didn't qualify for Head Start. I didn't know you had to be at a certain level. What did I know? I just heard it was a preschool program. So, but I was home with them. I made a lot of things. My sewing continued. Every single birthday that we had, well, maybe I shouldn't say every single, but I can remember decorating cakes. I can remember making wheatgrass juice and almond milk and soy milk, even before you could find it in a store anywhere. I belonged to a holistic healing group in the 70s. And so that's where we learned how to make the things that we did, made my own ice cream, baby food. My kids never had formula, never ever had formula. And I breastfed them till they weaned themselves. And they went from the breast to the cup. And we had a Vitamix. Matter of fact, I still have the Vitamix. We had it was the steel Vitamix. Now they make them out of plastic, but it was steel. And I just remember back then knowing how important it was not to eat processed food. I never made a cake from a box mix. I never made potatoes from a box, except for maybe when I was living at home before I left, my parents' home. Because back then, who knew, Everybody had the bacon drippings on the stove, the container with bacon drippings. You made potatoes from a box, but that was something I don't too much remember. We made potatoes fresh. But we never had TV dinners, even though they were out at the time. We never had TV dinners. And so now my children are getting older, and my oldest daughter went to St. John Lutheran, so kind of carrying on that tradition, Lutheran education. She started out, come to think of it, we were living in Euclid at that time. She went to Thomas Jefferson School. She was just like a fish out of water. The kids were misbehaving. The language that they used was the language of their household, so it wasn't, congruent with the way we spoke. Not thinking we were better than what they were, but it was just different. And I remember my sister, Lori, who was always with me. She went to Erie View Catholic. after she went to Lutheran East, for some reason she wanted to go to another school. She went to Erie View Catholic for just a year. But she was always with me because Erie View Catholic was close to where we lived at the time. We lived at Park Center, so it was just like a few blocks away, so she would come over. And she loved her some Shannon. That's my oldest daughter. She would go with me to doctor's appointments. She just loved being with me. And she loved my Shannon so much to the point where she actually cried when she had her first son because she didn't think that she could love him as much as she loved Shannon. And there was 7 years difference between my youngest sister, Lori, and me, but we were real close. And but I said, not a problem. You're going to love them just as much. And I kind of chuckled because I said, they're not going to be a problem. And so we had some really good times, you know, all my sisters, but more so my youngest one and I were closer when she was living. So now I'm at home, and then we moved. We were living in the Forest Hills area on the Cleveland Heights side of Forest Hills. And from there, we moved to downtown Chicago. If anyone's ever gone in on the Dan Ryan, where they would end up at, there's a Manhattan building right on the corner of Dearborn and Congress. That's the first place we lived in Chicago. It's in what is called the Printers Row area. And we were there for the summer. It was just the best time to, you know, to be in Chicago during the summertime. And we were looking in a lot of areas, and we ended up settling in a place called Naperville, Illinois. And we had a house built, and ours was the third house on the street. The subdivision was fairly new, so the school that they built there, the elementary school, was new. So my younger two went to that school. My oldest daughter, when we got to Naperville, attended the junior high. And it was a mixed bag during that time because I mentioned to someone who was the director of the school, I said, well, I'm going to start working now, you know, moving to a place at a higher cost of living. He said, you can come work for me. He said, I guarantee you, you would be the best teacher I've had. I walked in, and it fit like a glove. I had no idea. And I guess because, well, he saw how I disciplined my children, and he, you know, I actually talked to them. Time out, you know, and when they came out of the corner, they had to tell me why they were in the corner, you know. So if they couldn't tell me, then they had to go back to the corner. And when they stood in the corner, they stood in the corner. They looked right in that corner, because if they were looking away or playing with something, then they got more corner time. So if I counted and I said, okay, go stand in the corner, if I counted to 3, they were in the corner, you know, because they knew I meant business. I loved those years. I was, you know, there's no such thing as a perfect mom, but I was pretty close to it at that time, I could tell you. It was just the whole learning. Everything was a learning opportunity, you know, everywhere.
Well, so you lived in Cleveland, grew up in Cleveland, went to school in Cleveland, went to college in Cleveland, married, moved away.
Yes.
Eventually came back to Cleveland. And I know that you eventually moved on to the city of East Cleveland.
I did. But before we do that, I want to let you know, when we were in Naperville, Illinois, there were only 3% blacks that lived in Naperville, Illinois. So my children were the only kids that would be in their classroom. But they were able to handle it because they were academically prepared, even to the point where I'm sure it was an eye-opener for all the teachers were white. And I remember my youngest daughter, when we moved there, it was time when she's being tested, and she tested higher than all the kids in the district at that time. And this is the same daughter who years later was a National Merit Scholar. But all my kids were very gifted and talented. So at the time, and this is one of the reasons why I mention it, is yes, I lived in an area where there's 3% black, but I worked in an all-black neighborhood, 63rd and Sangamon. First, the school was near State. It was more north, but then it moved close to the Indiana border, which is where 63rd and Sangamon was. So I always say I had the best of both worlds. We had very good neighbors because it was on the, where we lived was close to the I-5 corridor for technology and industry. So we had engineers all around us, to the sides, behind us, and it was one of the reasons why we selected Naperville was because we figured there would be a lot of people there from different areas, so we'd all be in the same boat. Because it's very easily we could have ended up in a place like Cicero, mostly Italian, or other areas of the city that were known for being racist. So that's how we ended up there. But I appreciated the time when I was a teacher therapist in a school for multi-handicapped children, you know, at 63rd and Sangamon. Part of Ada S. McKinley, and that's when I really honed my teaching skills. Even though it was a school where it was a separate from a public school, because the children's behavior were severe or profound, whether it be behavioral, some of them had behavioral problems, emotional disorders, learning disabilities, some of them had autism. And I loved that period of time. And I received Excellence in Teaching Award because I took it seriously. I figured my children were doing well, and I was going to make sure that any children that I was responsible for were also doing as well as they possibly could. And I've even had some kids who were mainstreamed back into the public school setting, which is almost unheard of. But I really came into a wonderful place, and knowing I was quite capable of not just teaching, but being a very good teacher. And when the director left, the director who hired me left, he said I should apply for his position, and I didn't. I mean, I did apply, I didn't get the position because they wanted someone who had the credentials at that time. He had a doctorate. It wasn't until afterwards the person who hired him said she should have hired me. But that's, you know, it was good to hear that. And once I was in the position, you know, I didn't get it, I didn't fret about it. I did the best I could doing, you know, what I was supposed to do as a teacher. I didn't sulk or anything, you know. Best man got it. He had a doctorate. I didn't have a doctorate. So then my husband's job, AT&T, transferred us back to the Cleveland area. So we were looking at schools, and at that time we decided, well, we were going to settle for the schools in Shaker. I started out on East Boulevard, not too far from where I was born. I lived in my sister's apartment. She was in New York, in Manhattan at the time. So it was on the corner of East Boulevard and Ashbury. And that was our base, and I was hoping to be able to send my kids to private school. I had 3 at the time, but they were not going to go to Laurel or Halfway Brown because they knew who they were. And they they said they did not want to have to get into a fight or tell them where to jump off, you know, because they were very real. Even though we lived in Shaker, you know, they knew that they were black. Even when we lived in Naperville, Illinois, where there were 3% blacks, if it came time for them to do a report in school, they selected, you know, black subjects. And my oldest daughter's best friend was Egyptian. And so they were there. They were friends for the whole time that they were there. And I remember going to school one day for a open house, and the teacher telling me that Shannon gave them a whole history on why Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, and it had nothing to do with the fact that he had an affinity for them. So I was very pleased about that. Because even though I lived in Naperville, and it was 3% black in the area in which we lived, I was determined my children were going to know who they were, you know. So I think I succeeded in that.
Wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
wonderful. So then you moved back to Cleveland.
Yes.
And how do you come to the city of East Cleveland? How did you move from moving back here to Cleveland and then moving on to East Cleveland?
Okay. At that time, let's see, I worked at the Plain Dealer. Let's see, that was right before I came. Oh, when we moved from Shaker, my children were all grown out of the house. So at that time, I moved to Cleveland Heights, because there was a guy who I knew as a result of when I managed the Plain Dealer's newspaper and education program. So 10 years later, he's looking for someone to move into his house. At that time, my husband of 33 years, well, we were married for 27 years, but we were together, so for a total of 33 years. So we split up, and we didn't have a long, hard divorce. It wasn't anything nasty. We just decided what we were going to take, and that was it. It was very amicably done. And our children were grown, so, you know, we didn't have any, you know, we just separated. And so the guy that I knew, he was a Jewish guy, very nice person. And he would invite us over to their house for trout dinners. He belonged to a trout club, and he had tickets, season tickets to the Cleveland Indians, so he would sometimes invite us to Indian games. And when I had a sponsorship program at the Plain Dealer for the children to receive the newspapers in their classrooms. He sponsored, you know, kids. And so he was looking for people to move into the house. He didn't smoke. He, at that time, he wasn't eating meat. And so it just worked out. He said, you could come move in my house. And so I moved in his house, and 3 months after I was there, he had a stroke. He had a stroke, and when he had a stroke, he couldn't even sit up. You know, you prop him up, he'd sit right back down, or slump right back down. And so I actually ran the household, everything, all aspects of it. And then, because the stroke left him paralyzed on one side, and partially paralyzed. And so he had a fall one day. And when he had that fall, I knew that he had broken not only the good arm, but his good leg. He was on his way. He got out of the bed to go turn off a light. And I said, no, you know I would come and turn off the light. Yeah, but I didn't want to bother you. He was so gracious all the time I was there for 6.5 years. I didn't get paid for it. You know, he was my friend, and he did not want to go to a nursing home. He begged me not to send him to the nursing home. And then when Earl, my honey, and I got together, now he proposed to me. every once a week he was proposing to me. And I said, look, I'm not going to leave you in a lurch. You know, I wouldn't want anyone to do that to me. So you don't have to worry about it. He still went on to propose to me every now and then, and he really truly loved me, you know, and I loved him as, you know, a person. He was just such a wonderful person. He loved me and Earl, my honey, and he just figured that because Earl and I were really close and loved each other, that we were going to put him in a nursing home. No, but he ended up going to a nursing home by virtue of his fall. And I was in tears when he fell. It was the emergency people were there, and I just knew that was the end, because it was on his good side. You know, so he was partially paralyzed on one side, and then both his arm and his leg. So that was the end of that. So I had to look for a place quick, fast, and in a hurry, get rid of all the things in the house. And I ended up, I was talking to this girl that I knew. I didn't know her very well, but she said she was living in Crystal Tower. She said, oh, you know, you can come and rent there. So that's how we ended up in East Cleveland. And if I had more time, you know, we would have moved, you know, looked around, but we were there, and that's all it was. And I remember crying because I moved in there. It's a 3-bedroom apartment, but I still had so many things because I moved from the house in Naperville, which they had a whole big semi-truck, literally, to move us from Naperville, Illinois to Shaker. And the same thing, you know, when we were Shaker, I got rid of a whole bunch of things. But yeah, so when we first got to Shaker, I mean, when Earl Williams Jr., the love of my life, we actually met at Lutheran East. So we met in high school. He left high school, although I was there all 3 years. He actually, all 3 years, yeah, freshman, okay, 4 years. He left and went to Kennedy for 1 year, and then he went to Shaker, and that's where he graduated. And we went to a high school reunion 30 years later. And he was living in Cincinnati at the time, so I never will forget the time he called. He said, well, my brothers are gonna, you know, I'm gonna move back. And he said, well, my brothers are gonna help me move. And he called and said, well, my brothers moved me in, why don't you come over, you know? And I had gathered some things for him that I thought, you know, guys wouldn't think about, some rags and, you know, just miscellaneous things. And we saw each other every single solitary day for months. He only left, like, it was just one day that he was gone during that time. And it was such a wonderful relationship that blossomed. I wasn't looking for anyone, and neither was he. But we were very honest with each other from the beginning, and we were ourselves, you know. And, you know, it was so beautiful because from day one, I mean, this is me, you know. And he showed me his real self from day one, too. And then we had this running joke that we have that was 10 years ago, almost 11. And the running joke is, he would say, honey, you're just so fine, you know, so wonderful and all this. And I say, yes, until I change. And so that's how I ended up in East Cleveland. And when we ended up in East Cleveland, we started digging roots. Not consciously we're digging roots, but okay, we're here. Let's find out about the community. Let's, you know, continue doing some of the things we were doing before. I didn't know a lot about East Cleveland until I moved in East Cleveland.
Had you ever heard of East Cleveland as a child growing up?
Yes, and what I was going to say is I had one cousin who lived in East Cleveland, and I can remember going over to visit her. She was an older cousin. She had one daughter who was younger, a lot younger than I. So it was just pretty much to visit Cousin Carol. And so Cousin Carol lived on Mayfair. That I do recall. But I remember going to East Cleveland. I lived in Glenville when I was going to Lutheran East. So if we either took the bus, so we got off at the, we could go two ways, either taking the 9 to Euclid, or I should say the 10 all the way to Euclid and taking the 9 all the way up, or we could take the 3 and walk, which would take us to the Rapids station at Superior in Euclid. So we would drive up, going through parts of East Cleveland to get to and from school, or if we were driving in the car. And one of our favorite places to stop would be the McDonald's that was right there. We also, my father, remember, he's a fun-loving father. He would always take a sled ride, sledding at Forest Hills Park. And every winter, you know, we made sure we had our sleds together and our warm clothes, and we did that. So, and then the pond that was there, I remember walking around the pond. And also, before I moved to East Cleveland, some very good friends of ours were Hare Krishna, they're of the Hare Krishna faith. And they would have the Lord Have Mercy Festival at Forest Hills Park every year. And they didn't have one last year or the year before, but Krishna Nandini said that they were going to have another one pretty soon because people were always asking about it. It was so much fun.
So the Lord Have Mercy Festival was actually sponsored by the Hare Krishnas?
Absolutely, yes. Wonderful participation, wonderful food, entertainment. It was just a good time. Matter of fact, Krishna Nandini's mother, Mother Bumanti, brought the Hare Krishna movement to the Cleveland area. Yeah. And I also, now when I lived in Forest Hills, I lived on the Cleveland Heights part of Forest Hills. So I was very much aware that it bordered East Cleveland. But didn't venture into East Cleveland that much unless I was, you know, just going through, yes.
So would you say this is maybe your earliest memory of East Cleveland?
My earliest memory was when I was sledding, you know, at the park, and then visiting my cousin Carol, and then later on going to Lutheran East. So that was it. But we did jump in, not too long after we got here. We went to see a friend of ours, a friend of mine, who grew up on Olivet, who was playing in Fences. She was acting in Fences. And so her name was Cliffy Jones, and Cliffy said, you know, they're going to be auditioning for a play, Bubbling Brown Sugar, tomorrow night. Why don't you and Earl come? And up until that time, my mother had been trying to get Earl, you know, to come up and audition for something. She just felt that he just had stage presence or whatever she saw in him. I think she may have heard him sing. He has a wonderful voice. Yes, he does, naturally. And so I wasn't planning on auditioning, but I wanted to encourage him. So I said, okay, you know, I'll go first, I'll audition. And so I did my audition and went upstairs, and then he finished and his audition, and when he came upstairs, he said, you got an A+ on your auditions. I said, yeah, sure. He said, no, really? He said, you got an A+. He said, I got a B, but you got an A+. And so then at that time, Freddie gave us the, you know, the characters that we were supposed to play, but I didn't know, I wasn't familiar with Bubbling Brown Sugar, other than I knew it was on Broadway in the 70s, and I knew that it had some of my favorite music, music from the 20s and 30s and 40s and whatnot, and that's all I knew. So it wasn't until like a week later when we were actually going through the script did we realize we had starring roles. And it was the first time the director said, in more than 20 years, he said he's never ever put new people in starring roles. And when I say new, we had absolutely no experience, had not done any plays or anything before Bubbling Brown Sugar.
This is both you and
both of us, yeah. So we were age 52 at the time. You know, it was like, okay, what did we get ourselves into? But we like doing things together. And I remember having discussions about making sure that we keep our synapses, you know, going and, you know, keeping our memory tight. And the only way to do that is to have novel experiences. And this was quite a novel experience, to say the least. And so they even did an article, Margaret Bernstein did an article on us, because I know you know Margaret, did an article on us because, you know, we were doing this for the first time. I sang 4 solos, Earl sang 4 solos, we were love interest in the play. We did 13 different showings. You know, the production was 13 different shows. And I was very shocked. And I never, and for whatever reason, I didn't have any butterfly. Yeah, I know what the reason was, because I knew my parts. That's the reason, I knew my part. But my family was so surprised. They had never seen me do anything like this. And of course, you know, when we were growing up, I was, you know, the clown and always personating this person or that. But to actually sing, you know, solos, you know, and dance, and we had to learn how to tap dance and all that kind of stuff, I was, as I said, I surprised myself.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
how long have you lived in East Cleveland now?
6 years. And we also would go to the public library for the jazz concerts. Sean Jones, loved to sing several of his concerts, just love Sean Jones. He's just so wonderful. Also, the Tri-C Jazz Fest had some jazz performances at the East Cleveland Library. And some of the other things that we did was going to Forest Hills Park, you know, walking around the pond. We had a Tai Chi class. One of our friends, Robert Rim, who is a wonderful photographer and an artist who lives in East Cleveland. I was aware of Robert. That's another person in East Cleveland, kind of think of it before we moved. Robert Rim, who has a beautiful home, well-kept property, inside and out, and very much into the arts. As a matter of fact, I remember one time we went over to celebrate the life of one of Robert's friends, and at that time it was, oh gosh, the guy, how am I forgetting his name? That's awful. An actor who started out in Caramo, and he was playing the head doctor on, what's the television program? Not House, but the other one. Grey's Anatomy, absolutely. And so I have to come back to that. That's terrible because his name, I mean, I'm picturing him, but he's actually my friend, my sister Julie's friend. She's visited him in California. So it's a shame not to say his name, but I can't remember. Jim Pickens. Thank you. Jim Pickens. Wonderful guy. So, and just met a number of wonderful people. Of course, Norma and Don Freeman I knew previously for many years, and they know my family. And so I would see them there when they had performances. They actually had performances in their backyard. Sometime when it rained, it would move inside. But that's also a wonderful part of my East Cleveland experience.
So you are considering these that you just spoke of as your fondest memories of East Cleveland?
That's exactly right. And 2 doors from the Rims were where my niece's nephew's grandmother, who was Caucasian, lived. And so I would also go over to see Miss Corner was her name, when my sister was living and when her children were very young. She went to school with Mrs. Corner's son. That's how they met. Other ways, let's see, I would of course drive through East Cleveland if we were on our way to Euclid. When we were younger, I remember passing the Manor, or stopping at the Manor's Big Boy when they had the drive-in theater. And I remember my grandmother was in the car, and we would stop there. My grandmother died when I was 4 years old, but that's still a memory that I have. Mm-hmm.
So Michele, I'd like to go on to the next question. In what ways has the city of East Cleveland changed over time? Not just during the time that you were living there, but if you could think back to those times where you say you moved through East Cleveland on your way to other places around the city.
Okay.
Just in what ways, in your opinion, has the city sort of changed over time?
Well, not unlike a lot of inner city areas where, you know, there's a lot of blight. I've noticed, you know, the housing, the deterioration of the housing. I've noticed just even driving down Euclid, the East Cleveland portion of Euclid, looking like it's in a war zone, you know, some aspects, some parts, some buildings. And used to be very vibrant, and the businesses looked nothing like they look now. And even the park, I can remember from attending, you know, the park, you know, when we were younger, it seemed to not be as well kept as it was in years gone by. So very much aware of that. Now, you know, you see, you know, when Huron Road Hospital was closed up and the building was demolished, they have Stephanie Tubbs Jones Center, which is on Belmont, close on Euclid. And it's a nice new building, very sterile looking. I could have, you know, they could have asked me. I could have told them, put some trees here or something, you know. Of course, there's Circle East, which is an attractive looking building, except for right under the steps. I noticed they're held up by wooden poles. And so maybe they just haven't gotten around to painting them, but that would be something that I would like to see them do. Let's see. That's pretty much it. I can't think of anything else in terms of any new construction. and certainly they could use some new construction. I know the times are, such that economically, there's, we're not in the best position. And I noticed that there's still houses that are very well kept. They still have a good amount of housing stock that would be comparable to the houses in Shaker. I would just like to see more of it.
So what types of things do you think contributed to those changes? I know you mentioned some positive changes, but
well,
those that are not so positive, what are the things that have been taking place?
Okay. When I lived in Cleveland Heights section of Forest Hills, there were a lot of white families. I guess most of them were white. And the family that bought our house when we moved out was white. And I know that there's still a number of whites that live in Forest Hills, but I've only come to understand since I've been here that there was a large migration. And they actually, because unfair real estate practices, redlining, they forced a lot of those Caucasians out of their houses under threat that you better move now or you're not going to get the amount of money out of it, because the blacks are moving in and all those scare tactics. But I was just alarmed at how fast it happened. It was just like overnight. It was amazing. And just absolutely deplorable. And another memory that I had, now as I think about it, is every single solitary Christmas we got in the car, and not only did we go to see Neela Park, which is still something that I do even in my adulthood, but we used to drive through Forest Hills and look at all the and looked at all the beautiful Christmas displays. So I was very much aware of how beautiful it was, and even those houses were better kept, some of them. So even in the Forest Hills area, I'm seeing some changes. Not just the inner city part. And again, some of them are very well kept,
And I'm not sure if you know the answer to this or not, but you mentioned that during I'm not sure what time period was this when you talked about folks being asked, folks that were sort of migrating out of these Cleveland.
Oh, okay. My understanding, because again, I didn't live here during that time, was that it took place during the 70s, yes. And I really want to go back and look at matter of fact, I am going to find out exactly what the statistics are relative to the, the number of blacks that were living here before and after the mass exodus.
That speaks to my next question, which I said that I'm not sure if you have an answer for, but do you think that the property values dropped significantly in that area? For me personally, I know that a lot of those homes are registered homes. They're part of the registry, the historic registry.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if a home that's considered a historical registry could lose its value.
Okay. But I would not be aware of it. But even if it's on the registry, but it's not, I would assume that they would be well kept. And because I understand the area that's on Roslyn now, as a result of it being in a historical area, they were able to get monies to actually put into the homes. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I am aware that, monies were available. not now. I mean, you know, there's not much money left for anyone to do anything with. Yeah. But is that what you were?
Well, my question was slightly different.
Okay.
I'm putting myself in the position of being a Caucasian homeowner.
Okay.
Having a real estate agent say, oh, you should get out.
Okay, going back there. Okay.
Yeah, black people are moving in, and your property values could just suddenly, like, just hit the bottom.
Well, that was part of the scare tactic. It didn't mean that that was going to happen. That was part of what they used to get them out. Oh, I better get out real quick or I'm not going to be able to get the value for my money, you know. I'm not going to be able to get the value for my property. So yes, and I know that a lot of those houses were very well kept for many, many years. And then just like any other inner city area, whether it be Glenville or whatever, you have absentee landlords.
Absolutely.
And that has always been a problem. And so I know that occurred. I also know that neighborhoods were changing anyway because the times were changing. We already had the breakup of the communities due to the busing. And that was one of the reasons why we were in the Freedom School that I talked about earlier. But I also know that, you know, after the riots, you know, the Glenville riots where I lived, those properties never were restored. And the black businesses did not spring up again afterwards, you know. So that blight is still there. You can still see it. As a matter of fact, if you ride down 105th Street, it looks like Sarajevo, you know. And I'm like, wow, you know, this just doesn't seem like it should be the case this many years later. But then there was the degradation, said it right the first time, of the family. You had, when I grew up, there were two-parent families. The man was the breadwinner. There were a lot of entrepreneurs and contractors who lived in the area where I lived. And the mothers were home with their children. The mothers were home primarily. Some mothers worked, but when I was younger, most of the mothers were home. It was a greater sense of community, a greater sense of commitment to the community, both in terms of, you know, the houses. And at that time, a lot of the people they attended the churches that were in the neighborhoods where they lived. Now, if you go to those churches, 9 times out of 10, they live in the suburban areas and they're coming in for church on Sunday. So you had that. And also, let's talk about the welfare. That also had an impact where the man could not be in the home in order for a woman to receive services for her or her children if they needed. They were incarcerating our black men left and right. So that made it it made it next to impossible for families to survive financially. And whereas when I grew up, I know I've never had any want for anything. And there was always plenty to eat, always. And we had all kind of meats, and that was when I was eating meat, but all kinds of things, candy. I remember we used to love to go to shopping with my father. That was one of the things I didn't mention. Every Saturday, my father did the shopping more so than my mother. Can you imagine every single week having, of course, the staples and the meats and the potatoes and carrots and all the healthy stuff. But every week, my father bought candy, popcorn, ice cream, cake, ice cream, soda pop, pretzels, I mean, every week, you know, and then we found out that wasn't good for you. But a lot of the families, you know, I could see the neighborhood even changing, you know, as I was moving to adulthood. Most of the neighbors and the families stayed there, though. There were some single parents you see moving into the neighborhood, but for the most part, some of those families stayed the same. Some of them are still there. Some of them are still there. But it was just not a good time for blacks in inner city areas throughout America. Let's just, you know, that's what it is. Part of the design and the school situation. I understand that. I didn't understand it then, but I understand very much how things that are the way they are because it is very purposeful.
Okay. So with that, let me ask you this next question. How has race or racism impacted you personally?
Well, I can say as it related through my parents, which, you know, live in the same household, even though it wasn't done directly to me, I experienced it through my parents. My father, when it came time for him to get promoted, I remember all of a sudden the file cabinet caught on fire. Okay, how does a file cabinet catch on fire? And all the records, this is what he was told. You see what I'm saying? I mean, he did very well and moved up through the ranks, but it was a special position, I don't know whether it was foreman or higher or something like that. I just remember that being an issue. I also remember my mother having various jobs. And my mother she was a professional artist. Her work was a fine art. Her medium was watercolor, acrylics, oils, and she had a Midas touch when it came to whatever medium she was using. Even sculpture, she did sculpture. When she did her first watercolor, she entered her first watercolor that a friend of hers encouraged her to do. You know, why don't you try watercolor? And so she did, and with her very first entry, she was accepted into the Ohio Watercolor Society, which was a huge deal, the very first one, and was part of the traveling exhibition. My mom talked about experiences she had at the Cleveland Institute of Art, where her teachers would make fun of her, say, now you know you didn't do that work. Who did you have to do this work? You know, who did it? You know, you didn't do it. I know you didn't do it. And over just badgering her. And, you know, she left. I can remember walking down, this was about, I want to say, maybe about 20 years ago, years after she worked as a designer. She designed the dinner plates. Walking down the streets of New York, passing Bloomingdale's, and identifying her work that received an award that she didn't even know received an award. I can remember my mother, like a lot of blacks experience, when she worked for the Goulders, it was an art-related job, and she was supposed to train someone who was coming on. And she trained that person, and that person, somehow they found out how much she was getting, got paid significantly more than she did. There were, remember when we were younger, before they went to photography, like they are now, they used to have a lot of illustrations. All of the fashion was illustrated. And my mother was one of the illustrators for Higbee's. But before that, it was like she had a tremendous difficulty. My mother would look at the illustrations and in the paper prior to that and know it was really off. You know, some of the companies, you know, like, no, this is not how a human body is structured. But yet they didn't hire. And then she did end up working, Virginia Marty, she taught illustration at Virginia Marty. And one of the things, some company would come in and bring clothing for the models to wear. And I remember this was during the time when I guess they had pleather, you know, which was pleather or leather, you know, it wasn't leather at all, but it was supposed to simulate leather. This is the first time it was it was available, not more recently. We didn't want to have anything to do with it. We did not like it. But yet my mother was accused of taking one of the garments. And the guy used to always kid my mother and say, you know you did it, cough it up. And so one day my mother found out through one of the other people, you know, he really does think you stole it. And so that was the end of that. She just said, that's, you know, how could she work at some place that is accusing her of stealing something that she knows she didn't. And there were other occurrences like that. I can remember when I was younger, hearing the older people talk. And when I was younger, children were not in the same room when the older people were talking. And they were talking about the master plan, the master plan. You always heard master plan. And you knew that when I got older, I found out, oh, okay, they're talking about Cleveland Clinic. And Cleveland Clinic was moving into the area and forcing people out. In some cases, if they went freely, they gave them the money and, you know, they got the property. But I understand there were other areas, I mean, other individuals that weren't so fortunate, especially some who had businesses. They would drive business away using various tactics. But I was very much aware that that was just not right. When I went to Freedom School, I learned about Jim Crow. And even though my parents were born and raised in Cleveland, that was very new to me. And I remember how abhorrent that was to treat another human being like that. And I never personally experienced anyone, you know, calling me, you know, a name until I got to Shaker Heights, and this was in the 90s. We were all riding our bikes, my children, 3 children, and my husband and I. And we were on South Euclid, because at the time we lived on Alderside, east of Lee. Very nice area. And so it wasn't too far. We were riding bikes not too far from the place where we owned, you know, from our house. And there was a group, about 5 men, the grown men, and they said, look at them riding the bikes. One of them said, yeah, they probably stole them, you know. And that was very disconcerting. It really was. I had, and we had every much right to be there as they did, you know, yet they were calling attention to the fact that we being black, you know, were riding on their street, you know. And so that was pretty much it.
So tell me, how do you think race or racism has contributed or really has impacted the city of East Cleveland?
Well, apart from the white flight of the 70s, there's, you know, white families aren't breaking down the doors to get into East Cleveland, you know, and a lot of that has to do, I think, the schools. I mean, of course we value education, but there is a difference between schools that are predominantly white and schools that are predominantly black. And as I said, I understand now it's part of the, it's part of the design. Because at one point in time during the 60s, they used to talk about rehabilitation. They don't talk about rehabilitation anymore. You haven't heard that for many, many years, because they figured out a way that they were going to make money off of this. And so with the privatization of prisons, children no longer had to be prepared for the job track, which is still working for them and their organizations. Still a form of slavery, if you want to look at it like that. They didn't teach entrepreneurial skills. They used to teach economics early on, but they took economics out of the schools. I don't know if they continued to teach economics in the white schools, but I know in the black schools they were no longer teaching it. So they wouldn't want us to have that crucial piece of information. So now they have two tracks. Those who are fortunate enough to get through the crack and get a job, and then there's the prison track, which is for those children who are not applying themselves in school for whatever reason, whether it be because their parents were disenfranchised from the system themselves, or didn't have good parenting skills, or had children at young enough ages that they were not equipped to be good parents, even though they know that they did the best that they could. It just depends upon what lens you're looking through. And many of the moms had to work. I mean, the welfare situation forced the dads out of the house. So now you have the disintegration of the family even more so. And men are not taking the time to be with their children, especially their sons who need it. So that piece gets missing. And so I don't know if that, if that answers.
My next question is twofold. I'd like for you to talk a little bit about how inequality has impacted you personally, but also from that perspective, how has it impacted the city of East Cleveland?
Okay, as far as myself is concerned, of course we know that there is covert racism, institutional racism. I understand that. By virtue of working in a school in an area that's predominantly black, there was no instances that I knew where I was taken advantage of. I did pretty well, in that system and received awards. Through school, I remember not being as well prepared as perhaps some of my white counterparts, because I only saw my guidance counselor one time in my senior year when I was on my way out, and it had something to do with graduation or graduation fees, paying the fees or whatever. Could have had something to do with where was I going next, but there was no, okay, you want to have, keep your grades up so you can have a high GPA. I didn't even know any of that stuff. I didn't. And so I did pretty well, in spite of it. And even when I was in Illinois and I went to Northern Illinois University, at that time it was in the area of special ed, and I had straight A's the whole time, and the teachers offered to mentor me. They were white instructors, and they obviously saw something in me that was special and offered to continue that. But of course, we moved to, back to Cleveland area. So I can't think of any instance where personally we have a black-run city, So I cannot think of anything that is done, personally, in that regard. Certainly, as I'm going from one community to another, I'm very much aware of, and I pay attention to how many of these individuals working on these buildings are black, especially the one that was when they were working on the VA hospital, you know? And I was very much aware that there were very few blacks who were working, you know?
But what about inequality in the city of East Cleveland?
I can't, because I haven't lived here long enough, I cannot think of any purposely, you know, inequality, except that I know, when people call it a food desert, I like to say it's an oasis waiting to happen. Because when we start to define ourselves using negative terminology and take on those same definitions and words, then we're doing it to ourselves. And I was very much aware of the fact of the inequality as it related to grocery stores. And so it's you know, I have to go out of East Cleveland in order to eat the type of foods, the healthy foods that I require to keep my body healthy. And so what I did was, you know, I joined, I went over to where I knew they had a City Fresh, non-certified organic produce fresh stop that was at Huron Road Hospital and later Stephanie Tubbs Jones Center. But when it was at Huron Road Hospital, I said, you know, I went over there and I volunteered. And I volunteered for 6 years. And I ended up being a fresh stop manager at Whole Foods, which was the fastest growing fresh stop and the largest fresh stop that they had in the whole, not just Cuyahoga County, but they have even more so than the one that was in Lorain and Medina. But yeah, very, very much inconsistency. And of course, we no longer have the Huron Road Hospital here. And that was a huge slap in the face because the trauma center was moved. And you also had, from my understanding, the neonatal arm of the hospital was moved. I understand that it was a business decision. I understand the hospital was very old. So I can't speak on that. I just know that the hospital that was once very vibrant and a very necessary part of the city is no longer there. So the workers there, even if they could go to restaurants that were in and around East Cleveland, there are not a lot of them, visiting, even to go to the grocery stores, you know. It's just, you know, so that's no longer there. But the food access is a huge thing because that has to do with the health of every citizen in East Cleveland. And when you look at the fact that our people have major challenges with diabetes, heart disease, which I think all these things are related to, unless it's congenital, they're related to the foods that go into our bodies. We have to make conscious efforts, but there has to be access. What about the individuals that have to walk to school, to get their grocery stores, you know? And sometimes I've actually, and Earl would actually see them, you know, people we may know, and help them, you know, give them a lift to and from Save-A-Lot, which the joke among me between me and my honey is, yeah, we can save a lot to go save a lot because you don't want to buy anything. There's nothing healthy to buy. So you end up saving a lot. And I think the only thing that we bought at Save a Lot are bananas. Once I was making something and I did buy pineapple. So not even all the produce we can buy because we lean more towards organic, but we don't buy everything organic because you don't have to. You just have to know which ones to buy organically. But they have a very poor selection when it comes to the things that we do need to eat organically. So there's a huge inconsistency. And the garden, you know, we had a garden here in Road Hospital. When they, demised the building, there went the garden as well. And I helped put that garden in. You know, I helped do that, and that was for the community. They also used the produce from that garden for the hospital, the people who were in the hospital.
So it served many purposes.
It served many purposes.
So speaking of that, can you talk a little bit about any memories that you have of the community of East Cleveland coming together?
Absolutely.
Around an issue?
Absolutely.
Or cause? Okay.
Absolutely. I'm going to go back to before I moved to East Cleveland, and this is information that came to me fairly recently. During the time of the 40s, 50s, there were a lot of black clubs, music clubs. I know in Glenville, where I was, they used to bring in Billie Holiday, a lot of the Ella Fitzgerald, and a lot of people sang, you know, right there on 105th Street. And then there was a place, a jazz place in East Cleveland. It's no longer there. But the residents, I understand, came together and they protested tearing it down. But it didn't work for whatever reason. Now I can remember people rallying around the Huron Road Hospital when they were going to close Huron Road Hospital. And there was quite a bit of uproar about that for reasons that I previously mentioned. And I can remember for a long time, at least all things are relative, but I think that a lot of people protested. They, you know, like stood their ground and like, no, we're not going to let this happen. I understand that business decisions happen many years before they take place many years before they happen. It was a business decision. And I have to choose my battles. And that was not one of the battles that I was going to choose for that reason. It was also, I was involved in other things as well that were related to East Cleveland. And, but I really give kudos to those people who came together and wanted to fight that. But as I said, I just thought it was a done deal, just from the information that I had gathered. The other time that I know that people rallied was during the library, during the time when Cuyahoga County was supposedly in the running for taking over the library. And there was a lot of discussions around that. We still had the library. We were told there was a lot of money that was still left, that was there, you know. So if we were in the black, boy, we're going to give the library to a county that would not only just take, I mean, you got the Performing Arts Center. You have what would happen with the Fluellen exhibition that's in the library. And some of the other East Cleveland archives, they would become part of the library. So I salute those people And I got involved with that. So yes, I can remember that. Other than that, I can't think of anything else. I know that at one point in time, and I don't know when it happened, but fairly recently I found out that they gave the library, at one point in time, East Cleveland owned all of Forest Hills Park, and that they gave part of it to Cleveland Heights. I'm still researching that, but if that is the case, I'm saying, why would that happen, you know?
So I heard something slightly different.
Okay.
That when the Rockefellers bequeathed the park to the city, it was with the stipulation that part was East Cleveland and part was Cleveland Heights.
Okay.
Now that I can't say I know for sure either, because
Okay.
that's nothing I've ever researched.
Yeah, and that's why I said that, you know, it's not conclusive, and I wanted to be fair and say that was just the information that I received.
Okay.
But if that's the case, it's too bad. We did get the larger chunk of it, you know. I love the park, but we don't need to think in terms of giving away anything. And as it relates to the library, besides the main branch, they would have also had those other buildings, with 3 other buildings, you know, and that seems so absurd. Why we need buildings, viable buildings. We need to have control over those buildings. They are ours, and we should decide what we want to do with those buildings.
So now we have several different cities and institutions that sort of border the city of East Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
So in your estimation or your perception, how do you think these institutions and cities have impacted the city of East Cleveland?
Well, the one that stands out in my mind is the University Circle area, University Circle Incorporated, by virtue of it being landlocked, by virtue of it being bordering East Cleveland. I know that there is a wonderful partnership. And I've, you know, East Cleveland, University Circle, I mean, that's part of my growing up. That's my background, my playground. And my mother is, by the way, she's the first female muralist. She has a mural that's currently on the corner of 108th and Magnolia Drive, right behind the VA hospital. So it, you know, that whole area just has just been very significant to me. Right across the street from my mother's mural, there's the second house from the corner is the League House, Junior League House. And I was a member of the Junior League and attended many functions, you know, in that house. And again, by virtue of my mother being an artist, the connection with the art museum. She's had exhibits at the Cleveland Institute of Art. Matter of fact, she won Best in Show and Best New Work the same year, both of them, and it was a $2,000 prize, and that was an international, it was, well, I don't know about international, but I know it was at least a national alumni exhibition. And there were only 2 blacks, you know, at the time in that particular exhibition. There was something else I was going to say. And then my mother also had her work in May Show. Remember, they had the May Show. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but she's had her work in several May shows at the Art Museum. And so that's one area, the University Circle. Cleveland Heights, by virtue of the park being associated with that, you know, it's adjacent to our section of the park, and also the Forest Hills area being adjacent to the East Cleveland part. I'm aware of that. I'm aware of the driving from Cleveland through East Cleveland, going down Superior, right at the line of, demarcation. So though that institution I'm very much aware of, the University Circle, more so Case Western Reserve. I know Marchup is involved in a lot of the things that take place at East Cleveland, including neighborhood connections, MyCom, which is My Community, My Commitment organization for the youth. And so I know that there's a commitment of some degree and a relationship. I do know that there's Windermill Church that has had a partnership with Cleveland Clinic and later the Stephanie Tubbs Jones Center. So they continue to do a lot of health-related things such as the health fair, and they have once a month when seniors would come and have a nice healthy meal, and they'd leave with the recipes. They would have a talk, and I thought that that was really, really good. And they also had someone that came in and did, not line dances, or what is it, Zumba. And so that was a lot of fun. Earl and I attended 3 of those, so that was really, really fun. Cleveland is close, East Cleveland is adjacent to Euclid, and we often go to the park, the Euclid Reservation, Euclid Creek. We walk, there's 5 miles, we walk 5 miles both ways. And so we certainly have enjoyed that. There's not too many other things that I am aware of, by virtue of partnerships. But, and then there's Neela Park. That has been, as I said, a mainstay in the community and a part of my growing up. McGregor Home. I helped plant the orchard, attending the beekeeping, working with them on the bees. So I've attended the sessions. You learn how to do beekeeping, and there's a garden, and I planted a garden at the Coit Road Community Garden Center or area, and it was only one summer because I was doing City Fresh, and with City Fresh I had so much produce that I didn't need to have the garden and when I was buying the produce very inexpensively. So that was really good. But I do know at McGregor there's also a community garden, and I was going to have a community garden there as well. And I love the things that the horticulturist, who's now in development, Mary Ann, is there. I always call her Mary Ann. But she's there, and she does wonderful things with the residents. And that is one of the cleanest, well-kept, from my perspective, nursing homes. And I know that because when I was caring for the gentleman for 6.5 years, and he had to go, in and out of nursing homes at some point in time, I was just so much aware of how I never smelled anything when I came in that nursing home, and they were very welcoming, and aesthetically is very nice. So that's my take on it.
So, what would your vision for East Cleveland be? If I ask you, what is it that you want to see in the coming years?
In the coming years, I definitely think they need to strengthen the schools. Absolutely. You cannot expect for young families to willingly come to East Cleveland knowing that the schools are in the shape that they're in. And to be fair, I want to say that there is one school in East Cleveland that is doing very well in terms of the grade it got on its report card. But the others are not they're not doing very well.
So you consider the schools a major issue?
Absolutely. It has a lot to do with, you know, the vibrancy of a community. And when people are involved in their children's education, they're also involved in the community. The other thing that I think is very necessary is to make a conscious effort to build viable green spaces. We have the opportunity, we need to do it. And that doesn't mean put a garden on every lot, but certainly we can have, for instance, where you have a house that may need some work, but it still could serve as a learning center if it's in close proximation or preferably next door to empty lots or several empty lots, so that you can use it as a training center, an education center. And there's enough lots in East Cleveland where you can find, you can certainly not just teach agriculture, but you can actually help individuals use agriculture as a way of living. And I just think that that's a very slow process. I know it is a process that is underway. In terms of that area of land where Hewin Road Hospital once was, that may be, and I say may be because you figured being a hospital previously, all the chemicals that are in the soil. So it would have to be asphalt or above the ground planting, which means that you'd have to do a lot to, you know, add the soil, build up the soil, etc. I think we need to teach children how to garden. And those that want to go on to learn how to farm, I think that's necessary. And the reason is not just for the sake of planting for food, but it is a strong knowledge base and that feeling of nurturing that you get. When going back to early childhood education, when I attended Parkwood Elementary, we had gardens in the summertime. And someone would come around and grade the garden. And then afterwards, harvest the garden, and we made the fruits and vegetables into little animals or whatever, you know what I'm saying? But we learned how to nurture, you know, that was one of the things. And I think it is very necessary for individuals to understand the whole biodynamic thing that goes on. Very often when we think in terms of farming or even gardening, we want to plant in nice little rows. And what do? We go digging down into the ecostructure and destroying the ecostructure because of ignorance. That's not how our forefathers planted, whether they be the Native American or whether they would, the African, you know, the African roots. Everything is connected. And we need to teach our children the whole biodiversity thing that is going on. And the connection, you know, the bees, what do? Why are they necessary? Why should you not want to destroy the bees, you know? The whole cycle of life. And when we were younger, we saw so many insects, and that was another part of growing up. I mean, they were prevalent. Every time it rained, the sidewalk was filled with worms afterward. And there were caterpillars all over, and praying mantis and grasshoppers and the lightning bugs. I mean, they were prevalent. And that tells us there is something wrong, seriously wrong with our environment. But we need to teach individuals that you are a part of your environment. And I think when people do that, they eat better. It's just things that happen. They become better people. They become better neighbors, because it is also something that gets taught vicariously just by virtue of working with the earth. And when you work with the earth, you're as close as you can be to God. And I truly believe that. I truly, truly believe that.
So I'm going to ask you again, because what you've just recounted to me, I would look at as major issues. So out of that, what is your vision for a future East Cleveland?
Well, as I was saying, some of the neighborhood, some of the houses that were demolished, where there's open land, we need to have children working on that land. Now, I'm working with an organization called MyCom, which I briefly mentioned, My Community, My Commitment. And it is a commitment that we all need to embrace, because it is a commitment for our future, our children. And given that we're going to pass the baton on to them, I would want to make sure we're doing everything within our power to prepare them. And so what I love about MyCom is it is a conglomeration of communities that have developed programs for the youth. And I'm not just talking about programs just for the sake of having programs. I am talking about high quality programs. I teach the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens, not just teach, I should say facilitate. And my organization is the only organization in the state of Ohio certified to bring this wonderful leadership program to schools that are in the area.
Is this the East Cleveland area specifically,
well,
or Cleveland?
Schools in greater, case in point, this past summer, we had 2 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teen programs from students, or I should say, students age 13 to 17. It was held at John Carroll University. It was absolutely wonderful. We had children from Parma, Strongsville, Pepper Pike, South Euclid, Shaker, Cleveland Heights, Lyndhurst, Solon, Euclid, let's see, Richmond Heights, Maple Heights. At the time, I tried to get them from East Cleveland, and it just didn't work. Timing might have had something to do with it.
So before you continue, you're saying MyCom is not in East Cleveland?
MyCom is one of the communities, is the newer community, and it is an initiative in which the people who are sitting at the table are going to be the ones who decide what type of high quality programs are going to be in the schools and in the community.
And there are very few people from East Cleveland sitting at the table?
Well, in East Cleveland, I love what's happening. No, that was as it related to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teen program. We did not have any students from East Cleveland. I tried, but it just didn't.
The leadership program.
That was the leadership program.
Okay.
That was the leadership program. But as far as MyCom is concerned, we have a number of individuals who are in East Cleveland and associated with East Cleveland. And I'm just very pleased to be sitting at the table because I am very much looking forward to a wonderful array of programs that I hope are going to be here for years to come. And I invite other people into the process. It is very important to have the youth involved. They are. And that's everything from determining what our vision is, what our mission is. So we include them. So I really like that process, and I like it because the superintendent of the East Cleveland schools is at the table, the library, director of the library was at the table, Boys and Girls Club. You also had Salvation Army, and I brought in a friend of mine. Tiffany runs the Cutting Board Academy, which is run out of Case Western, which is run out of Tri-C's hospitality, restaurant, school, the old May companies. Yeah, we talk about memory. That was one of my earliest. I mean, we used to always catch the bus and go downtown because we were so close to the bus line, you know? And so I invited her because she has a Cutting Board Academy, and thereby teaching them about, you know, foods and the science. She has a science of foods background, and for students that want to go, you know, carry it on to, you know, become chefs, you know, there's that possibility. But one of the reasons why I wanted her to come on board is because I also wanted there to be some type of partnership, because I'm inviting Gladys Walcott and also the Green Scouts program. There's a lady who runs the Green Scouts program through the Botanical Gardens. And I wanted to give the opportunity to Gladys first, with some assistance, of course, because Gladys lives in East Cleveland and was a former East Cleveland council person. And I know that she does the gardening here at the Coit Road. For a number of years she's been involved with that. And the Botanical Gardens would come in. I'm sure they could do a good job. But it was something about, this goes back to a question that you asked earlier. There's still a sore spot about the Botanical Gardens putting the new building. They built the current building, and up until that time, anybody could come outside, look at the beautiful gardens. You didn't have to be a member of the Botanical Garden community. People would come over if they got married, and they would take their pictures in the garden. Then all of a sudden, we're bringing it in, and just cut off access to it. And so I know a lot of people in the Black community thought that there was a slap in the face, you know? And what a wonderful way of introducing children to horticulture, or through just looking at the different plants, you know? So that's a missed opportunity. So now the Green Scouts are operating out of the Botanical Garden. So it's like, yeah, we're not good enough to come there, but you're going to come to wherever we're going to be, you know what I'm saying? And there seems to be an arts movement that's happening now where they're trying to seek out places that, you know, are where the artists are. And it's like sometimes it's too late, you know? Sometimes it's too little too late. But there is an interest, there is a resurgence of the, you know, in the area of Black art, you know, so they're interested in doing these things. But I think, you know, sometimes you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so you have to look at it objectively and say, well, they're at least reaching out to a number of individuals and when they're young at age who would not have the opportunities. So that's how I look at it, you know.
So what would you be prepared to do?
Well,
I'm sorry, I'm just making East Cleveland a much more, I don't want to really use the word better, but what would you do to enhance the atmosphere and the ambiance and the quality of life in East Cleveland?
well, I am working on MyCom. We'll continue to work on MyCom. I haven't missed a meeting since I've been involved. So that is one commitment. Is that better? Okay. So the one commitment is MyCom, which I will continue. And then I have volunteered at City Fresh, non-certified organic produce, because I am determined to educate as many of our people as is humanly possible, simply because they sometimes feel that free is better, and free can kill you. Dying a slow death, getting all of the free foods, you know. Some of them it's okay to get free, but you just need to know which ones you absolutely positively should only eat if it's organic. So I continue in that effort. I'm participating in the Voicing in Action project, part of Case Western Reserve Social Justice Institute. And that has really been an eye-opener in terms of the people that I've interviewed and being involved with the process and learning, you know, more about the city through my involvement. It also allows an opportunity for my honey and I to work together because he's also part of the Voicing in Action project. I continue to meet so many wonderful people. I do. And other ways that I contribute to East Cleveland is by participating. You know, if they have, like earlier I mentioned the jazz concerts that they have at the theater. I do that, and I'll continue to do that as long as I'm here in East Cleveland. I've also been in touch with Michael Smedley, because I understand that he would be the person to talk to convey my ideas about how to use the various spaces, the green spaces.
So just for people who may not be familiar with who Michael Smedley is.
Michael Smedley is the assistant to the mayor, Gary Norton. And so I have some wonderful ideas. I think they're wonderful, and I'm willing to share. Okay.
Well, excuse me. I wanted to ask you about what you think about the political climate in the city of East Cleveland, where it's been, and how you feel about it now.
Okay. I'm not real comfortable about the political climate in East Cleveland. And that has been a sore spot since I arrived. From a visual perspective, watching the what goes on at City Council, I mean, it appears, I've heard people say, oh, it's a circus, it's a circus. I said, it couldn't be that bad. I started listening to it and watching it and said, that bad. And what bothers me more so than anything is how can we control our narrative if we're constantly putting out negativity? You know, you can have all the wonderful things going on, but if this part of it is not changed, I'm telling you, it is working against us. And what I think and what really rubs me the wrong way is I think in terms of the young people who live in East Cleveland, who happen to see this going on, whether it be by virtue of watching television with their parents or grandparents, or turning the channel on the way to seeing other things and seeing, things where adults are behaving badly in front of them. They're supposed to set positive examples, and I cringe. I literally cringe, and I would just think it would not be something that I would want my children to watch. On the other hand, if that was not the case and they, behave more civilly toward each other, and this is both sides, it's on both sides, then I think it would be, our young people could learn valuable lessons about the political process. But if I had children, it's not something I would encourage them to watch, truly. So that's one thing. It is very polarized. The political climate here is very polarized and has been from the very beginning. And I don't know whether I have any answers for that, but I just certainly encourage people to not take things at face value and to make sure that they take responsibility and ask questions till they get to, what they feel would be conclusive, And sometimes you're successful and other times you aren't. It depends upon who you talk to. But I try not to I'm not going to say I try. I don't get involved with, all the he says, she says. I don't want to hear that. We've got a city to run. Let's do what we need to do and move on with it. There's some very favorable things that are happening at City Hall. I like the things that Judge Dawson is doing. He's always been committed to and connected to the youth in terms of educating them. And when we educate, we could hope for better outcomes. We hope that the behavior is going to be improved. I like the fact that the police chief was having meetings, regular meetings, open meetings with individuals in the community, and actually reaching out to individuals that may have been in trouble with the law before. Kind of a meeting of the minds, and you learn why we're doing what we do and what you can do to circumvent that. And I think that's very, very, very healthy. And I hope that the dialogue continues, because we're always having people moving into the neighborhood. And that's the one thing we need to continue. Just because a program is wonderful for a specific area of time does not necessarily mean that, oh, we did it, done, over. It just needs to continue. I think the biggest problem is for the youth at this point in time. So I'll be very, very interested in knowing how the MyCom initiative is going to be received by the parents. And Belinda, who is the mayor's, Belinda Kyle, who is the mayor's secretary, does a wonderful job with MyCom, making sure that the information is out, keeping us on track. We're working with, the funding comes through Starting Point, and we're working with neighborhood, help me out with it, the Neighborhood Leadership Cleveland Institute, yeah, wonderful organization. And so there's good leadership. So I think we'll end up in the right place if we just stay plugged in long enough, because sometimes we give up when a process seems to be lingering, but we just have to stay in there. But politically, I think we need to not be afraid to say what we need to say to our elected officials. But in order for that to occur, we have to be able to do that without fear of reprisal, retribution. So those are things that I think need to take place. Not so much community service announcements, oh, we're doing this, that, and the other, and we need to do that. We need to learn about the city, how it operates, but it also needs to be welcoming, just as our schools need to be welcoming. That's another area I think all children could benefit from. There being more of a welcome spirit, welcoming the parents, not just when they want the parents to be there, And I'd like to see the business community kick it up a notch or a few notches. I really do feel that that's necessary. And
in what way?
Well,
Kick it up a notch or two.
Well, I think that there needs to be a committee that oversees, some of the things that are related to the businesses. I went into one business and I was just appalled at what I saw, adult material that I thought should not be there by virtue of children coming into the place. I can't even remember specifically what it was, but I asked her, so I said, do you really think that this should be here? Because you have children who are coming here, and we're responsible for our children. And he said, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. I'll move it. Now, I haven't, been there. It's not a place that I would frequent, on a regular basis. So, I just have to take them at their word. But it would be nice if we had a committee, just even in terms of signage. Signage. And do you have an attractive trash can outside of your business? And just there, I'm sure there are other things that they can do that could help improve that, more so around aesthetics. But I think that would be a step in the right direction. And even in terms of a committee that could, work with the mayor and determine what kind of businesses do we need to have here? And what is it going to take to get those businesses here? And I think that we should involve our youth. There should be, I know that there's some people who are working on projects whereby they teach entrepreneurial skills to our young people, but that's a wonderful opportunity for them to learn through the businesses. So I would like to see that happen. I really would. But I also like to see some of the green spaces used for children, so.
Well, this has been a wonderful, wonderful interview, and I only have one last request.
Yes.
We talked a little bit about the narrative of East Cleveland, so
Yes.
before we sign off,
Yes.
why don't you pitch us your narrative for the city of East Cleveland, changing the narrative?
Changing the narrative?
What would you say?
I love being a part of this Voicing in Action project in terms of changing the narrative, because through the stories, we are changing the narrative. I think we need to be conscious of what we say around the young people. If there is something that we don't like, we need to ask ourselves, can we change it? And we need to be the change that we want to see in the world, as Gandhi talked about. And if someone is trashing our neighborhood, or we see someone throwing trash, this is one of my pet peeves. I always say, excuse me, you may not realize, but you dropped this trash, and I would really appreciate it if you would pick it up. It would make me feel so much better. Could you do that? And sometimes it's how we say it, And I think that we need to start creating positive narratives. So if for people who feel that there's not enough positive things going on, enough positive narratives, well then my question is, what are you doing to contribute to it? You know, either way, negatively or positively. So it starts with a consciousness. And we just have to adopt a certain attitude. You know, this is my community, I live here, and this is where my roots are right now. And so if it's gonna be better, then I have to take some responsibility. You know, as it is, when I see children, all the children belong to me as far as I'm concerned. You know, I've accepted the position of being an elder. It's not by virtue of being 61, it's by virtue of knowing that they're part of me and I'm part of them. And so especially where I live, if I see kids, you know, what are you doing, you know, if it's the summertime, are you reading? And, you know, so I think that is something that we can continue. But I'm always developing a narrative, and will continue to do so as long as I'm in East Cleveland.
Well, thank you so much. Everyone, this has been Michele Hill for the Voicing in Action Project at Case Western Reserve University.
Thank you.